Welcome to John Gets Games. With 31 votes in and winning by 5, today I'll be reviewing Valley of the Kings. This compact deck builder focuses on lean decks and interesting card combinations. First I'll go over the rules, then I'll do my review, and I'll end with 3 more games you can vote on for my next review. Alright, so how do we play Valley of the Kings? This is a deck building game, and in the beginning, each player is going to have an identical deck of 10 cards. This includes 4 Shabti cards, 3 urns, 2 boxes of food, and 1 offering table. I'll explain how some of these cards work as I go through the rules. Let's jump into how we play our turns. You will draw a 5-card hand at the beginning of the game and at the end of every subsequent turn. Now on your turn, you are going to evaluate each card in your hand in one of about 4 different ways. The first way you can use a card involves only using the buying power, which is the scarab value in the top left part of the card. This will allow you to purchase cards from over here in the pyramid. The second way that you could use a card is instead you can just do the action, which is the bottom part of the card. You read the text and you do what it says. The third option that you have for this card you can only do once for free on a turn, and that is entombing the card. So you take it and you put it underneath your tomb card over here. Now this does 2 things for us. The first thing is it's no longer in our deck. We don't shuffle it in or anything like that, so it keeps our deck small and lean. The more important thing that this does for us is we only score victory points for the cards in our tomb at the end of the game. I'll explain how scoring works later on in the video. The final thing that you can do with a card is just do nothing with it, discard it to your discard pile and not use it. Alright, now let's go through 3 different examples of how we could use this exact hand and this exact pyramid layout to get 3 quite different outcomes. Turn example 1 is very simple. We look at our hand and see that there's 5 buying power, and then we look over to the pyramid. Now you're only able to buy cards that are on the bottom level, and so we look over here in the top right of this card and we see that the Tayat amulet costs 5. So we can grab this card, put it into our discard pile, and now we have used every card in our hand so we don't have any more options. We take our hand, we put that into the discard pile as well because we used all of them, and now we need to fix the pyramid. We crumble the cards down so they fill in the slots, and then we draw a new card from the top of the deck to fill in the pyramid, draw 5 cards, and this example is over. Turn example 2 involves us trying to get this Book of Traversing Eternity, but the problem is that it's not on the bottom level, it's on the second level here. So we'll use this Shabti card, and it says we can swap 2 cards in the pyramid. So we take this card here, we swap it with the amulet, and now we can spend the last 4 cards in our hand for 4 buying power to grab this Book of Traversing Eternity. It goes into our discard pile, as well as all the cards that we used in our hand, and now we were able to grab this card from the second level, even though it wasn't initially available on the bottom. And now for turn example 3, where we do some creative stuff. The first thing we're going to do is spend 3 buying power here to grab the Canoptic Jar here. This goes into our discard pile. The next thing we're going to do is use this urn card for its action, which says put the top card of your discard pile on top of your deck. So now I take this card here and I put it on top of my deck, which means I'm going to draw it into my next hand. Finally, we have the Shabti card that hasn't really done anything, so we take her and we put it inside of our tomb so that we've now satisfied that one time we can do it a turn. We want to make sure to do that as often as we can, and now we've done that. At this point, all these cards go into the discard pile, and we have a hole in the middle of the pyramid. So I get to decide which of these 2 cards will slide down. I might say, put this one down here because it's more expensive, and then the pyramid will crumble as normal. Players will continue to take turns, and at a certain point, we're going to start to see age 3 cards come out into our pyramid here. You may have noticed that all these cards said 2 in the bottom right, and our starting cards here said age 1. Now all the age 2 cards are shuffled on top of the deck, and the age 3 cards are shuffled below it. So now we can see that these cards get much more expensive, they get much more powerful, and it also indicates that the game is getting close to being over. The only endgame condition is that every card in the deck is used, comes out into the pyramid, and gets grabbed or taken away. At that point, we make sure everyone has taken the same number of turns, and then we see who has the most points in their tomb. So let's explain the tomb scoring now. The amount of victory points a card gets you when it's in your tomb is dependent on the type of card it is. Every starting card from our beginning decks gets us 1 victory point each. And the purple cards give dependent victory points based on the card it is. So this Ka figurine gives 3 victory points, where this Censor only gives 2. Now these bottom 5 cards get you victory points for having multiple of that specific color set. If we look in the parentheses on the bottom of each card, we can see how many different types of that color card there are in the game. So there are 3 sarcophagi, 4 jars, 5 amulets, 6 books, and 7 statues. And these score victory points equal to the multiplier of the number of cards you have from that set. So 1 red is going to get you 1 point because that's 1 times 1. If we were to have a second red card, which is a different type. We have middle and now inner. Now this is 2 times 2, which is 4 points. And finally, getting the third type of red would now get us 9 points for this chunk right here. Since there are only 3 different types of sarcophagi, this is the maximum amount of points you can get with the red cards. Obviously, if you were to get one of each of the 7 types of statues, that would be 49 points for that stack, which is huge. There are 2 of each of the colored set cards in the game, so 2 outer sarcophagus, 2 inner sarcophagus, and having a second identical card in your tomb gets you 0 points for that second card. So at the end of the game, we each take all the cards from underneath our tomb, get rid of all the other cards from our decks. We score victory points for all those cards under our tomb, and whoever has the most victory points wins the game. For my review of Valley of the Kings, I'm going to start with 3 positive points, then 3 neutral, 1 negative, and some player count discussion before I jump into my conclusion. So let's start with the positive. The first thing that I like about this game, in fact my favorite part about this game, is the entombing mechanic, where you take cards out of your deck and you put them into your tomb even from the first turn of the game. This is interesting to me on 2 different mechanical levels. The first is that you keep a tiny deck throughout the whole game. On average, you're probably going to have about a 10 to 12 card deck because you're just getting them out almost as fast as you're bringing them in. This means that since you drop 5 cards a turn, you're going through that deck repeatedly and you're seeing these cards over and over again, and you get a lot more exposure to the interesting card and potential combos you can get than you do in your standard deck builder, where your deck usually, in general, just gets big. The other side of it is I love that interesting and agonizing decision of when do you take the powerful cards and put them into your tomb, because you have to do that. That's where all the big points are, but those cards also have awesome buying potential, or they'll have a great action on them which chains with something else, and you want to put it off as long as possible, but you also need those points. You have to get them in there. So you're watching the tempo of the game, how close are we to being over, and how is everything all kind of syncing together, and you get them in there at the right point, or maybe you mistime it and you don't get all those points in and you leave a bunch of potential points in your deck and I'll do better next time. So really like the entombing mechanic. Also thematically, tomb, pharaohs, I think it really comes together well. The second thing that I really like about this game is that it has really interesting cards. Even the starting deck, those 10 cards that you start with, all have interesting things that you'll want to use even on like the last turn of the game. You're going to wish you had some of these cards. Unlike almost every other deck builder where the starting 10 are bad and you want to get rid of them as soon as possible, this one, you have this ability to get them out of your deck on the first turn, but you're thinking, do I want to get rid of an urn or do I want to get rid of a shabti? Oh man, those are very powerful effects. Now of course, they all have only a single buying power on them, so that brings them down, especially late game when you want to have much more consolidated, larger numbers in that buying power, but it's still really cool that you have 4 different types of cards in your starting deck, and they all do very interesting, important things throughout the game. They chain well. Also, the cards that you can buy that are not in your starting deck do all sorts of things that I'm not used to in a deck builder. They do crazy things, that like where you put cards from your hand into opponents' decks. And I just told you that you really don't have any bad cards in your hand, so you're probably going to be giving them some of these starting cards, but they're not going to be that upset at you for it because they probably got rid of a couple of those, and now they get access to them again. So there are other cards where you can just take cards from the pyramid and just put them in your deck, or just entomb them. Like seemingly very powerful actions that you would almost get used to seeing on like the 4th expansion for a game, but this game has them right at the beginning. The third thing that I like about this game is the way the Egyptian theme is kind of woven into the mechanics of the game. Now, I don't necessarily mean that I feel like a pharaoh putting stuff into my tomb for the afterlife. I don't really. But I like how the themes of Egypt and pharaohs come through into elegant mechanisms in the game, where you have that pyramid of cards that you can buy from. It's a pyramid, Egypt, okay, you kind of have to have a pyramid in an Egyptian game, but it's mechanically quite interesting and elegant, where you only have access to the bottom 3 cards, and you can kind of see what cards are coming, you can see what cards your opponents might want, and try to factor that into your purchasing decisions, trying to keep them from falling down to the bottom. You also have a pyramid in your starting deck of cards, where you have 4 shabtis, 3 urns, 2 boxes of food, and then an offering table. Even that's a pyramid, and that's a tiny little touch that I didn't even notice until like my 3rd game. So I just like how that stuff all comes together, but that being said, it's not necessarily a thematic overflow of feeling like a pharaoh. The first neutral point that I have has to do with the fact that there are many cards in the game that interact with your discard pile, including 3 from your starting deck of cards. But since you're churning through your deck so quickly, shuffling it every 2, 3, 4 turns, I found many times where I'd have a really cool potential combo in my hand, and I'd have no discard pile because I just shuffled. Because you're always shuffling in this game, and you shuffle your whole discard pile to make a new deck, and I'll be like, oh, I'm going to use an urn. Oh, I don't have anything to use it on. Or I want to do this combo, and oh, I don't have a discard pile. And it almost got me thinking that I want to try a variant maybe where I shuffle everything but the top card on the discard pile so that I always have one there to interact with. Now, you could definitely buy cards and those immediately go into your discard pile and you can immediately start interacting with those. So it's not like a flaw with the game by any means, but it's just something I've noticed through the plays that more times than I would have liked, I've wanted a discard pile and I haven't had one. The second neutral point is that replayability might start to become a problem. I've only played it a handful of times, but I've already started to see similar or identical card combinations come out where I'm like, oh, I did that last game. Do I want to do that this game because I've done it before? I want to try something else, but oh, that really is the right thing to do because I want to win still. And the game only has 104 cards, and 40 of them are the starting decks. So you only have 64 cards really to choose from as far as new stuff to combo in. And it's honestly surprising how much content there is in that 64 cards and in this tiny little $20 game. There's a lot of really cool stuff. It's very dense. That being said, you will start to quickly see that repetitiveness of I've done this before, oh, I've done this before. This is not that big of a deal though, because there are so many interesting decisions to be made beyond just what cards do you play, what cards do you buy, because you have when you put them in your tomb and how do you play the cards out in your hand, because you're constantly thinking about, do I play this as money or do I play it for the action? So also, I think if you get 10 plays out of a game, then you're already doing really well, especially if you've only spent 20 bucks. And I can see myself playing way more than that. This is also easily rectifiable if they ever come out with an expansion, so not that big of a deal, but something that you might start to notice. The third neutral issue is that I've seen fall behind losers happen in this game, and you can definitely argue that they made poor decisions to get to that point. They could have purchased different cards, made different decisions to get there, but that does not help them now. You know, we're like halfway through the game, we're now in the third act, the cards are really expensive, they really can't afford any of them, and there's really no get out of jail mechanic. They are kind of done for in this game, and they're not going to have that much fun when they're scrimping, they're spending every single card they have in their hand to maybe purchase a card, which means they're doing no interesting card interactions, and they might be watching other people doing really interesting hands where they're doing this to get that, put that over here, and buy this and do this, and they're just playing 5 cards, buying a card, hopefully. And that doesn't get them out of a hole. They are getting farther and farther behind as other people have great turns, and their turns continue to be mediocre. Now, you could argue that on their next game, that they will do way better, and you could tell them that, but it doesn't help them right there in the middle of this game, and that's definitely potentially a problem. And this leads us directly into the one negative that I have for this game, and that is that it tends to give bad first impressions. Not to everybody, not to me. I loved it from the first time I played it, but I've seen several people, usually those fall behind losers, really not have fun in that first game because they didn't really get how quickly you're going to need to put cards into your tomb to thin out your deck. They also didn't get how fast the game ended, and they were left with all these points in their deck, and they had almost no points at the end of the game. And I've talked to them after the game, and several of them have kind of had this very lukewarm, mediocre feeling to it, where I found that I have to try and convince them to play it again. They'd kind of rather play something else because they didn't have that much fun in the first time playing it. Not everyone's going to have this problem, as I said before, but this is something that you should definitely talk about if you're playing this game with friends. Just stress how important it is to buy cards that have large purchasing values, because when you hit those age 3 cards, just stress upon them that they get expensive, and if you don't have enough buying power, you're just not going to have fun for the second half of the game, which is pretty unfortunate. Now let's talk about player count. This game plays 2 to 4 players, and I've played all 3 of those options. I found that in the 2-player game, it's very intense, it's very thinky, it's really good, but it's a bit long. I found it could go over an hour and a half, and late game, you have so much going on. You have all these combos going because you only had one other person to counter a draft away from you, and you have so many cards in your tomb. You have like 15 plus cards, maybe even more than that in your tomb, and you're just constantly doing the math, like, okay, if I put this one in my tomb, then this one, and then plus this one, and then you multiply these with these, and I found that the gears can really start to turn late game, And when you're in an hour and a half for this game already, it can start to kind of feel like it's overstaying its welcome. And that's because you don't take any cards out of the game when you play 2 players. So you're always going to go through that deck. That's the only endgame mechanism, and that could potentially be a problem. In the 4-player game, it's kind of the reverse. You run right into those third age cards before you even realize it, and you could really have a problem being able to purchase them. This again leads right into those bad first impressions and fall behind losers that I've talked about before, because in a 4-player game, you just go through the deck so freaking fast, and you also have to stress upon the people in that game how quickly you're going to hit those really expensive cards. So I found that 3 players is best. That is the happy medium between the two, where you get to the third age cards at a slightly slower pace, but it doesn't bog down so much that you're 90 minutes in and you have just so many options going on. But that being said, I would play 2, 3, or 4-player at any point in time. I would not veto any of those. In conclusion, I really like this game, and I'm sure that's obvious already. It's a deck builder, which by itself doesn't really get me going, but it has enough interesting stuff on top of that it's keeping me excited. You have this new take where instead of like clogging up your engine with victory points, you actually need to rip your engine apart piece by piece and put them into a little hole in order to get victory points. So you're slowing your engine down by destroying it. So you want to slow down at the right speed so that it's completely dead right as the game ends. You add into that interesting idea with very cool card combinations that do zany things that you're not really used to, where you're giving cards to opponents and you're doing all sorts of stuff like that, as well as a really solid starting deck of 10 cards that give you interesting options all the way through the game. It just comes together in a really good package. Even if replayability potentially becomes a problem, 10 games of this is going to be great for the price point, and just that first game for me just felt so new that even that alone was worth it. So I definitely recommend you give this game a shot. Now it's time to see which game you want me to review next. I've got Port Royal, Corio, and Kingsforge. If you click on the link just below the video, it'll take you about 10 seconds to vote, and please subscribe to my channel to see which game wins. Thanks for watching.